Bienvenidos al canal de YouTube de Ediciones Rodio. Aquí encontrarás vídeos especializados en cada tema. Si te gusta nuestro contenido, no olvides suscribirte, darle a me gusta y comentar tu experiencia. Gracias por elegirnos en tu camino hacia el éxito.
Recuerda que todos nuestros temarios también están disponibles en formato digital y papel. Para cualquier duda puedes escribirnos a info@edicionesrodio.com. Cuerpo de Maestros. Inglés. Volumen 2.
Main ideas. Annex summaries. Introduction. The objective of this topic is to explain the most representative literary periods, authors, genres, and types of texts in the teaching of English as a foreign language. Without a doubt, working with tales and stories in primary education gives us the opportunity to develop competence in linguistic communication and competence in cultural awareness and expression, as well as developing the creativity and imagination of students in a relaxed context. It is remarkable that the pedagogical advantages derived from the work with stories not only fits the common European framework for languages, but also complies with the curriculum requirements in the Organic Law 3/2020, BO, of the 29th of December 2020, henceforth LOMLOE, amending the Organic Law of Education 2006. This topic also has a special relevance since it is directly related to the promotion of reading habits and the benefits that this implies, especially in the primary education stage. Through literature, it is possible to stimulate oral and written production and increase the vocabulary of students. The LOMLOE, in its preamble, underlines the necessity of promotion of reading habits, especially at this age. In addition, in the Crown Decree 157/2022 of March 1, which establishes the organization and minimum teachings of primary education, in Article 7, it establishes the following general objective: to acquire a basic communicative competence in at least one foreign language so that they can express and understand easy messages and handle in daily life situations. 1. Most adequate literary periods, authors, and genres to be used in English lessons. Literature contributes positively to language learning, since literary texts contain different registers and types of language use. Now we will analyze the benefits of reading stories in English as a foreign language class, and we will point out the most representative literary periods, authors, and genres to be used in English lessons. Reasons to use storybooks in the EFL. According to Collin and Slater, the main objective of using storybooks in English as a foreign language is to take advantage of the benefit of communicative activities to improve language in the context of literature. Without a doubt, stories are motivating and offer an enriching source of linguistic communication. Children love to read and listen to stories and tales, both in the foreign language and in the mother tongue. That is why any teacher should work with them, especially in the primary education stage. Below, we will point out some of the most important reasons why stories should be present frequently in English sessions. The stories are fun and very motivating for students, which helps concentration and self-esteem. In addition, we can get from our students a positive attitude towards the foreign language. Stories help develop the imagination of our students and offer a great source of resources to work on creativity. Teachers can use stories to introduce vocabulary or review sentence structures in a variety of contexts. Through the stories, students can learn more about the culture and traditions of English-speaking countries, since many stories introduce places, names, and typical customs of these countries. The stories represent a stimulus to produce messages in English, either orally or in writing. It is common to express tastes and exchange ideas. Working with stories helps students to improve both oral and written comprehension, since they improve concentration through visual supports or previous knowledge. Listening to stories in class helps to improve social skills, since it is a social experience shared by all. Students are interested in knowing the meaning of stories, and therefore, they have the purpose of understanding the history. Through the stories you can deal with issues such as empathy, respect for other cultures, equality, social rights, or solidarity. The stories are easily related to the different elements of the curriculum, as it helps to achieve the development of the specific competences, basic knowledge and objectives established in the Crown Decree 157/2022 of March 1st. 1.2. Genres. As far as novels are concerned, we recommend practicing extensive reading individually, maybe even at home. Intensive reading can only be recommended for certain passages. Although we will have to use readers which lack of literary quality, they will motivate our students to go on reading. All reading should be accompanied by comprehension exercises, such as comprehension questions. Next, we are going to consider poetry, which is adequate for intensive reading exercises carried out in the classroom. It seems to be convenient to present the author, the topic, and other points of general interest before starting to read. Poems can mainly be joined by exercises on vocabulary or the historic context. To read plays in the classroom, we must keep in mind that these always get their maximum expression when being performed. If we want to perform a play with our class, we should bear in mind that every student should be able to represent one character or have another activity, not less important, to carry out. 1.3. Periods and authors. Remember that we always refer to abridged editions or extracts prepared by the teacher beforehand. In the origins of English literature, we could only find one work which is worth being mentioned here, Beowulf's fight against the monster Grendel, which could be read in extracts. Regarding the 14th and 15th century, we could choose Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales, for example, The Squire's Tale, where an Arabian king receives 4 magic presents: a flying horse, a truth-telling mirror, a ring whose owner will be able to understand birds, and a curing spade. Besides, we recommend the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, especially the part where Gawain cuts off the knight's head to show his courage, and the knight rides off on his green horse with the head in his hands. The next epic we are going to view is Renaissance. Works from this time could be read in higher grades, and therefore we can choose among the following. The Faerie Queene, 1580–1599 by Edmund Spenser. This is a glorification of Queen Elizabeth. We could read the 3rd book, where a woman knight fights against evil. Polly Albion, 1613–1622 by Michael Drayton. Polly Albion could be interesting for its cultural contexts. It is a description of England and its history. We could choose extracts from the first 18 songs, which are illustrated and changed into prose by John Selden. A Midsummer Night's Dream, 1596 by William Shakespeare, who must not be forgotten when talking about English literature. We have decided on this play in the first place because its plot seems to be the most interesting one for our students. 2 couples want to marry their loves and not the ones chosen by their parents. Some fairies are necessary to help. The fairy scenes seem to be the most motivating ones to be worked on in the classroom. Much Ado About Nothing, 1598, another of Shakespeare's plays. Its theme is similar to the first one mentioned. Beatrice and Benedict on one side, and Claudio and Hero on the other want to get married, but conspiracy is against them until the happy end. Above all, the funny dialogues between Beatrice and Benedict are interesting. Macbeth, 1623, one of Shakespeare's tragedies, which we think could be motivating as it is a short one. To work on the play in class, we should focus on the 3 witches and the ghost's action. The witches convince Macbeth that he will be king, and the ghost worries him after the murder. Friar Bacon and Friar Brandy, 1594, by Robert Greene. It is a comedy written in prose which is about a brass head that is able to speak with the devil, and will do so when Bacon and Bungay would be present. As both fell asleep, the head falls on the floor when the housekeeper is observing it. Next, we are going to look at the 17th century. An ode by John Milton should be presented for its literary importance, as for example, Ode on a Grecian Urn. As regards prose, Samuel Pepys, with his Diaries, seems to be most representative. There is another work, a comedy, which reflects London life during the Caroline period, The City, Madam, by Philip Massinger. It is about a rich businessman who retires to a monastery, while his brother runs his business so badly that he even has to sell his wife and daughters to the Indians. These are the brother and 2 friends. 1.2.1. 18th century authors. As for the 18th century, the following authors and titles are worth mentioning because of their importance. Jonathan Swift. Jonathan Swift was born in Dublin, Ireland, on November 30, 1667. Swift had become friends with writers such as Alexander Pope, and they decided to write satires of modern learning. The third voyage of Gulliver's Travels is assembled from the work Swift did during this time. However, the final work was not completed until 1726, and the narrative of the third voyage was actually the last one completed. Gulliver's Travels was a controversial work when it was first published in 1726. In fact, it was not until almost 10 years after its first printing that the book appeared with the original text. Gulliver's Travels serves as a biting satire, and Swift ensures that it is both humorous and critical, constantly attacking British and European society through its descriptions of imaginary countries. Daniel Defoe. Daniel Defoe was born in 1660 in London, and was originally christened Daniel Foe, changing his name around the age of 35 to sound more aristocratic. Like his character Robinson Crusoe, Defoe was a third child. As a boy, Daniel witnessed two of the greatest disasters of the 17th century, a recurrence of the plague and the Great Fire of London in 1666. These events may have shaped his fascination with catastrophes and survival in his writing. Defoe attended a respected school in Dorking, where he was an excellent student, but as a Presbyterian, he was forbidden to attend Oxford or Cambridge. His Protestant values endured throughout his life despite discrimination and persecution, and these values are expressed in Robinson Crusoe. In 1683, Defoe became a traveling salesman. His fiction reflects this interest. His characters Moll Flanders and Robinson Crusoe both change their lives by voyaging far from their native England. The theme of changeable identity would later be expressed in the life of Robinson Crusoe, who becomes a merchant, slave, plantation owner, and even unofficial king. In his writing, Defoe often used a pseudonym simply because he enjoyed the effect. He was incredibly wide-ranging and productive as a writer, turning out over 500 books and pamphlets during his life. Defoe began writing fiction late in life, around the age of 60. He published his first novel, Robinson Crusoe, in 1719, attracting a large middle-class readership. He followed in 1722 with Moll Flanders, the story of a tough, streetwise heroine whose fortunes rise and fall dramatically. Robinson Crusoe was based on the true story of a shipwrecked seaman named Alexander Selkirk, and was passed off as history. His focus on the actual conditions of everyday life and avoidance of the courtly and the heroic made Defoe a revolutionary in English literature and helped define the new genre of the novel. Stylistically, Defoe was a great innovator. Dispensing with the ornate style associated with the upper classes, Defoe used the simple, direct, fact-based style of the middle classes, which became the new standard for the English novel. With Robinson Crusoe's theme of solitary human existence, Defoe paved the way for the central modern theme of alienation and isolation. Defoe died in London on April 24, 1731, of a fatal lethargy, an unclear diagnosis that may refer to a stroke. Samuel Richardson. Samuel Richardson was born in 1689 in Mackworth, Derbyshire. At the age of 17 in 1706, Richardson was forced to begin a 7-year apprenticeship under John Wilde as a printer, an employment that Richardson felt would gratify my thirst for reading. By 1715 he had become a freeman of the Stationers' Company and citizen of London, and 6 or 7 years after the expiration of his apprenticeship set up his own business as a printer, eventually settling in Salisbury Court. Lawrence Sterne. Lawrence Sterne was born in 1713 in Ireland, the son of an army officer. His two major novels, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman and A Sentimental Journey, were written near the end of his life. He died in March 1768, at the age of 55. Sterne wrote Tristram Shandy between 1759 and 1767. The book was published in 5 separate installments, each containing 2 volumes except the last, which included only the final volume 9. The numerous cliffhangers and anticipations Sterne put in the closing chapters of each installment are conventional features of serially published works, meant to arouse curiosity and maintain interest in the volumes to come. Tristram Shandy was enthusiastically received from the beginning, though it was also criticized for its frank treatment of sexual themes. Henry Fielding. Henry Fielding was born on April 22, 1707, in Somerset, England. Joseph Andrews, a comic novel, is often called the first realistic novel in English literature, was published in 1742. He died on October 8, 1754. Richard Brinsley Sheridan. Richard Brinsley Sheridan was born in Dublin on the 30th of October 1751. Sheridan began writing plays, and on the 17th of January 1775, the Covent Garden Theatre produced his comedy, The Rivals. After a poor reception, it was withdrawn. A revised version appeared soon after, and it eventually becomes one of Britain's most popular comedies. Two other plays by Sheridan, St. Patrick's Day and The Duenna, were also successfully produced at the Covent Garden Theatre. In 1776, Sheridan joined with his father-in-law to purchase the Drury Lane Theatre for £35,000. The following year he produced his most popular comedy, The School for Scandal. In 1806, Sheridan returned to the government as Treasurer of the Navy. However, he was defeated in the general election of 1807, but soon afterwards found a seat at Ilchester. In 1812, Sheridan attempted to win his old seat of Stafford, but unable to raise the money to pay the normal fee of 5 guineas per voter, he was defeated. Sheridan had serious financial problems, and in August 1813 was arrested for debt. Sheridan was only released when his wealthy friend, Samuel Whitbread, handed over the sum required. Richard Brinsley Sheridan died in great poverty on the 7th of July 1816. Anne Radcliffe. She was born Anne Ward in Holborn, London, England. She published The Castles of Athlone and Dunbayne in 1789. It set the tone for the majority of her work, which tended to involve innocent but heroic young women who find themselves in gloomy, mysterious castles, ruled by even more mysterious barons with dark pasts. Her works were extremely popular among the upper class and the growing middle class, especially among young women. Her works included The Sicilian Romance, 1790, The Romance of the Forest, 1791, The Mysteries of Udolpho, 1794, and The Italian, 1796. The most representative authors from the 19th century are undoubtedly the ones mentioned here. William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth, 1770 to 1850, British poet, credited with ushering in the English Romantic movement with the publication of Lyrical Ballads, 1798, in collaboration with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. William Wordsworth was born on April 17, 1770 in Cockermouth, Cumberland, in the Lake District. The magnificent landscape deeply affected Wordsworth's imagination and gave him a love of nature. He lost his mother when he was 8, and 5 years later, his father. With the help of his 2 uncles, Wordsworth entered a local school and continued his studies at Cambridge University. Wordsworth made his debut as a writer in 1787, when he published a sonnet in the European magazine. In that same year he entered St. John's College, Cambridge, from where he took his BA in 1791. During a summer vacation in 1790, Wordsworth went on a walking tour through revolutionary France and also traveled in Switzerland. In 1795 he met Coleridge. Encouraged by Coleridge and stimulated by the close contact with nature, Wordsworth composed his first masterwork, Lyrical Ballads, which opened with Coleridge's Ancient Mariner. About 1798 he started to write a large and philosophical autobiographical poem, completed in 1805, and published posthumously in 1850 under the title, The Prelude. Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, the 30th of August 1797 to the 1st of February 1851, was an English novelist, the author of Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. She was married to the notable Romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. Forced to stay indoors by the climatic events of the year without a summer, a group of young writers and intellectuals decided to have a ghost story writing contest. Mary found herself unable to invent one. That night, however, she had a waking dream where she saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. Then she set herself to put the story on paper. In time it would be published as Frankenstein. Its success would endure. Mary had incorporated a number of different sources into her work, not the least of which was the Promethean myth from Ovid. The influence of John Milton's Paradise Lost, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, is also clearly evident within the novel. Frankenstein is also full of references to her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, and her major work, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, which discusses the lack of equal education for males and females. The inclusion of her mother's ideas in her work is also related to the theme of creation motherhood in the novel. Mary Shelley died of brain cancer on the 1st of February 1851, aged 53, in London. At the time of her death, she was a recognized novelist. Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was born on February 7, 1812. He became a law clerk, then a newspaper reporter, and finally a novelist. His first novel, The Pickwick Papers, 1837, met with huge popular success. Dickens was a literary celebrity throughout England for the rest of his life. In 1849, Dickens began to write David Copperfield, a novel based on his early life experiences. Like Dickens, David works as a child, pasting labels onto bottles. David also becomes first a law clerk, then a reporter, and finally a successful novelist. Mr. Micawber is a satirical version of Dickens's father, a likable man who can never scrape together the money he needs. Many of the secondary characters spring from Dickens's experiences as a young man in financial distress in London. In later years, Dickens called David Copperfield his favorite child, and many critics consider the novel to be one of his best depictions of childhood. Dickens's other works include Oliver Twist, 1837–1839, Nicholas Nickleby, 1838–1839, and A Christmas Carol, 1843. Perhaps his best-known novel, Great Expectations, 1860–1861, shares many thematic similarities with David Copperfield. Dickens died in Kent on June 9, 1870, at the age of 58. Charlotte Brontë. Charlotte Brontë was born in Yorkshire, England, on April 21, 1816. At a young age, the children created a fictional world they named Angria, and their many stories, poems, and plays were early predictors of shared writing talent that eventually led Emily, Anne, and Charlotte to careers as novelists. Charlotte wrote Jane Eyre in 1847. The book, a critique of Victorian assumptions about gender and social class, became one of the most successful novels of its era, both critically and commercially. Autobiographical elements are recognizable throughout Jane Eyre. The plot of Jane Eyre follows the form of a Bildungsroman, which is a novel that tells the story of a child's maturation and focuses on the emotions and experiences that accompany and incite his or her growth to adulthood. But the Bildungsroman plot of Jane Eyre and the book's element of social criticism are filtered through a third literary tradition, that of the Gothic horror story. Like the Bildungsroman, the Gothic genre originated in Germany. It became popular in England in the late 18th century, and it generally describes supernatural experiences, remote landscapes, and mysterious occurrences, all of which are intended to create an atmosphere of suspense and fear. After the success of Jane Eyre, Charlotte revealed her identity to her publisher and went on to write several other novels, most notably Shirley in 1849. In the years that followed, she became a respected member of London's literary set. But the deaths of siblings Emily and Branwell in 1848, and of Anne in 1849, left her feeling dejected and emotionally isolated. In 1854 she wed the Reverend Arthur Nichols, despite the fact that she did not love him. She died of pneumonia while pregnant the following year. There is an uncountable number of works which appear in the 20th century, and we will only mention a few. It is not sure whether they seem to be the most interesting ones for everybody, but at least they are useful for class. The Long Long Dances, 1970 by Eric Malpass. The Pentecost family spend the winter on an uncle's farm. Gaylord and his friend Juliet have a great time, if it were not, but because of the adults it would even be greater. Then grandfather's new brother-in-law turns up, and he is not considered as a friend until they do not get used to him. A lot of problems turn up and are solved in the funny way Malpass tells us. Hello Mr. God, this is Anna by Finn, an Irish mathematician's pen name. This work has been compared with The Little Prince and Alice in Wonderland. It is based on a true story. Finn found 5-year-old Anna in a London harbour. He took her home and they were happy for the next 3 years. Anna has direct contact to God, understands physics, mathematics and so on, and knows above all what love and happiness mean. God and the world, people and love, laughter, fear, happiness and sadness. When she is 8, she falls off a tree and is sure that heaven is made for her. 1.2.2 21st Century Authors. It has been difficult to choose authors from the present, as we do not yet know which of them are going to be important for literature, so we have chosen some of them according to the contents of their books. Andrea Levy was born in London, England, in 1956, to Jamaican parents. She is the author of several novels. Some of them explore, from different perspectives, the problems faced by Black British-born children of Jamaican immigrants. Her first novel, the semi-autobiographical Every Light in the House Burnin', 1994, is the story of a Jamaican family living in London in the 1960s. Her second, Never Far From Nowhere, 1996, is set during the 1970s and tells the story of two very different sisters living on a London council estate. In 1999, she published Fruit of the Lemon, and in 2004, Small Island, which has been filmed on British television. Her next novel, The Long Song, was published in 2010. Andrea Levy has been a judge for the Saga Prize and the Orange Prize for Fiction. To get more information about Andrea Levy, visit her website, http://www.andrealevy.co.uk/. Nick Hornby was born in Redhill, Surrey, England, in 1957. He graduated from Cambridge University and taught English to foreign students while reviewing for magazines, including Time Out and The Literary Review. His first book, a series of critical essays on American novelists, was published in 1992. Fever Pitch, his memoir of a life devoted to Arsenal Football Club, was also published in 1992. It won the William Hill Sports Book of the Year award and was adapted as both a play and a film. Glenn Patterson was born in Belfast in 1961 and studied on the Creative Writing MA at the University of East Anglia, taught by Malcolm Bradbury. He returned to Northern Ireland in 1988 and was writer in the community for Lisburn and Craigavon under a scheme administered by the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. This first novel, Burning Your Own, 1988, set in Northern Ireland in 1969, won a Betty Trask Award and the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature. Black Night at Big Thunder Mountain, 1995, narrates the experiences of 3 people brought together on the Euro Disney construction site. The International, 1999, is set in a Belfast hotel in 1967 and tells the story of a day in the life of Danny, an 18-year-old barman. Number 5, 2003, traces the lives of the various occupants of a Belfast house over a 45-year period. Glenn Patterson has been writer-in-residence at the Universities of East Anglia, Cork and Queen's University, Belfast, and was one of 2 writers, with poet Bernardine Evaristo, selected by the British Council and the Arts Council to attend the Literature Express Europa 2000 Feet International Literature Tour. Sarah Bell is a British writer who was born in Loughborough, Leicestershire, in 1973. Her most interesting book is Written in the Stars. When Gemma Sinclair was 14, she and her friends created a time capsule, filling it full of keepsakes and letters containing their hopes and dreams for the future. 13 years later, Gemma stumbles upon the unopened box. Andrew Miller was born in Bristol in 1960. He spent his early childhood in a Somerset village where his father was the local doctor. His parents separated when he was 4, and he went, together with his older brother, to live with his mother in Bath. At age 11, having convincingly failed his 11+, he went to boarding school in Wiltshire. He was suspended from school in his penultimate year, poor attitude, and encouraged to go elsewhere. In 1978, after reading D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow, Miller decided to become a writer. After 3 years employed with social services, care of young people with learning difficulties, he attended Middlesex Polytechnic in North London studying literature, philosophy and history, and obtained first-class honors in 1985. In February 1996, after 6 years of writing, Ingenious Pain was accepted for publication. Casanova was published in 1998, and his third novel, Oxygen, in September 2001. The books have been published in over 20 countries. David Mitchell was born in Southport in 1969. He grew up in Malvern, Worcestershire, studying for a degree in English and American literature, followed by an MA in comparative literature at the University of Kent. He lived for a year in Sicily before moving to Hiroshima, Japan, where he taught English to technical students for 8 years, before returning to England. In his first novel, Ghostwritten, 1999, 9 narrators in 9 locations across the globe tell interlocking stories. This novel won the Mail on Sunday John Llewellyn Rhys Prize and was shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award. We cannot forget to mention one of the most important authors of the century. J.K. Rowling, born July 31, 1965 in Yate, United Kingdom, is a British writer known throughout the world for being the author of the fantasy book series for young people, Harry Potter. More than 400 million copies have been sold, making it the best-selling book series in history. Some of the books written by the author are Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. 2. Typology of texts. Typology of texts usually refers to the traditional distinction between descriptive, narrative, directive, also called instructive, expository, and argumentative texts. Nevertheless, in this topic it seems to be more relevant to explain different forms of literature. 2.1. Criteria for choosing stories. Choosing a storybook that responds to the student's interests is a complex task. That is why the teacher must involve students in the choice of literary texts and pay attention to their likes, preferences, and needs, following the principles of the Universal Design for Learning (UDL). According to Brewster, the teacher must take into account the following characteristics when choosing a story in the primary education stage. The storybook should capture the attention of the students from the beginning. The selected text or book must be appropriate for the age, interests, and objectives of the students. Students must be able to follow the story without great difficulty in order to enjoy the story. Therefore, the difficulty of the language must be appropriate, neither too easy nor too difficult. The story should offer children a rich language experience. It is important that the story contains colorful illustrations and images that, in addition to facilitating understanding, attract the attention of the students. Teachers should avoid stories with excessive descriptions and opt for repetitions of certain structures that encourage student participation. The story should encourage interaction between students with the text and the teacher. The proposed texts must be appropriate to the educational context and the moment in which they are presented. The teacher must check if the cultural elements that are included in the story are relevant for the students. The activities proposed after reading should be varied and should allow students to express their perceptions and opinions and encourage communication. 2.2. Poetry. A poem is a composition usually written in verse. Poems rely heavily on senses, precise words choice, and metaphor. They may take the form of measures consisting of patterns of stresses, metric feet, or of patterns of different length syllables, as in classical prosody, and they may or may not utilize rhyme. Typically, poetry as a form of literature makes some significant use of the formal properties of the words, rather than their meaning. Meter depends on syllables and on rhythms of speech. Rhyme and alliteration depend on words that have similar pronunciation. Much poetry uses specific forms like the sonnet, for example. Perhaps the most typical style of English poetry is blank verse, as exemplified in works by Shakespeare and Milton. 2.3. Drama. A play or drama offers another classical literary form that has continued to evolve over the years. It generally comprises mainly dialogue between characters and usually aims at dramatic theatrical performance rather than at reading. Tragedy is a dramatic genre developed as a performance associated with religious and civic festivals, typically developing upon well-known historical or mythological themes. 2.4. Essay. An essay consists of a discussion of a topic from an author's personal point of view, exemplified by works by Francis Bacon or by Charles Lamb. Genres related to the essay may include memoir, telling the story of an author's life from the author's personal point of view. Epistle, usually a formal, didactic, or elegant letter. 2.5. Prose fiction. Prose consists of writing that does not adhere to any particular formal structures. Narrative fiction generally favors prose for the writing of novels, short stories, and others. Singular examples of these exist throughout history, but they did not develop into systematic and discrete literary forms until recent centuries. Length often serves to categorize works of prose fiction. A flash fiction is generally defined as a piece of prose under 1,000 words. A short story comprises prose writing of less than 10,000 to 20,000 words, but typically more than 500 words. A story containing between 20,000 and 50,000 words falls into the novella category. A work of fiction containing more than 50,000 words falls squarely into the realm of the novel. A novel consists simply of a long story written in prose. As authors of novels do not have to concern themselves with verse structure, we may find a more complex plot or a richer, one in precise detail than one typically found in narrative poetry. 2.6. Literary genres in general. We are only going to summarize well-known genres. An autobiography is a biography written by the subject or composed conjointly with a collaborative writer. A biography is a genre of literature based on the written accounts of individual lives. Children's literature is a literary genre whose primary audience are children, although many books within the genre are also enjoyed by adults. Diaries and journals are books for writing, discrete entries arranged by date reporting on what has happened over the course of a day or other period. An essay is a short work of writing that treats a topic from an author's personal point of view. Fiction means storytelling of imagined events, in contrast to nonfiction, which makes factual claims about reality. The adventure novel is a literary genre that has adventure, an exciting undertaking involving risk and physical danger, as its main theme. Crime fiction is a genre of fiction that deals with crimes, their detection, criminals, and their motives. A fable is a short story or folk tale embodying a moral, which may be expressed explicitly at the end as a maxim. A fairy tale is a story featuring folkloric characters such as fairies, goblins, elves, trolls, giants, and others. The fairy tale is a subclass of the folk tale. These stories often involve royalty, and modern versions usually have a happy ending. The family saga is a genre of literature which chronicles the lives and doings of a family, or a number of related or interconnected families over a period of time. The satire is a technique of writing or art which exposes the follies of its subject, for example, individuals, organizations, or states, to ridicule, often as an intended means of provoking or preventing change. Nonfiction is an account or representation of a subject which is presented as fact. This presentation may be accurate or not, that is, it can give either a true or a false account of the subject in question. Epic is a broadly defined genre of poetry, and one of the major forms of narrative literature. It retells in a continuous narrative the life and works of a heroic or mythological person or group of persons. Lyric poetry is a form of poetry that does not attempt to tell a story, as do epic poetry and dramatic poetry, but is of a more personal nature instead. An ode is a form of stately and lyrical verse. A classic ode is structured in 3 parts: the strophe, the antistrophe, and the epode. Sonnet means little song. By the 13th century, it had come to signify a poem of 14 lines, following a strict rhyme scheme and logical structure. Travel literature is literature which records the people, events, sights, and feelings of an author who is touring a foreign place for the sake and pleasure of travel. An individual work is sometimes called a travelogue or itinerary. 2.7. Authentic and graded texts. Authentic texts are those texts that have not been written to learn a foreign language. Unlike adapted texts that are designed for language learning, authentic texts provide real language and help bring the real world into the classroom. Authentic texts are highly motivating for students, as they experience a strong sense of achievement when working with them. In addition, the illustrations and the format they present are usually different and attractive to students. Some authentic texts can be used with children of different ages and levels, depending on the time available and the ability of concentration. Thanks to the benefits mentioned above, the use of authentic texts in English foreign languages classes should be encouraged whenever possible, since many of them are very difficult for students, mainly for the following reasons: length, linguistic difficulty of the text itself, and the difficulty of the activities planned with it. Therefore, it is important to point out that the activities proposed must be in accordance with the abilities of the students and promote understanding of the text. On the other hand, there are many teachers who reject authentic texts because of their difficulty and defend the adaptation of these texts to make them more understandable for children. 2.8. Practical applications. Activities before the story, pre-reading. Hollow right pointing triangle introducing new words through pictures, objects or mime. Hollow right pointing triangle relating the topic to their own experience. Hollow right pointing triangle present the front cover of the book and the illustrations. Hollow right pointing triangle summary of the book. Hollow right pointing triangle drawing pictures of the book. Activities during the story while reading. Hollow right pointing triangle using puppets, masks or pictures. Hollow right pointing triangle miming or role play while presenting the story. Hollow right pointing triangle chorusing. Hollow right pointing triangle interaction with the students, what comes next? Hollow right pointing triangle drawing a picture based on the story. Activities after the story, post-reading. Hollow right pointing triangle retelling the story. Hollow right pointing triangle reordering jumbled sentences of words. Hollow right pointing triangle discussing about the story, characters, problems, solutions. Hollow right pointing triangle drawing and describing. Hollow right pointing triangle game, throw the ball and continue the story. Hollow right pointing triangle acting out the story. Hollow right pointing triangle changing or continuing the story. Hollow right pointing triangle interviewing different characters. Hollow right pointing triangle songs. To conclude, we would like to mention the exercises the International Reading Association, IRA, www.readwritethink.org, proposes to make students read, write, and think. These exercises are in accordance with what the different curricula establish as far as reading comprehension are concerned. According to Crown Decree 157/2022 of March 1, which establishes the basic curriculum of primary education, it is important to develop several key competences. To reach reading comprehension, written expression, and to acquire key competences, linguistic communication and multilingual competence, which are reflected in the Article 9, aspects like the following must be covered. Fluency. Interactive reading. Process writing. Word recognition. Writing to learn. Comprehension. Genre study. Language conventions. Vocabulary. Word study. Content reading. Critical literacy. Inquiry research. Integrated curriculum. Literature study. 1. Most adequate literary periods, authors and genres to be used in English lessons. 1.1. Reasons to use storybooks in the EFL. The main objective of using storybooks in English as a foreign language is to take advantage of the benefit of communicative activities to improve language in the context of literature. Without a doubt, stories are motivating and offer an enriching source of linguistic communication. Children love to read and listen to stories and tales, both in the foreign language and in the mother tongue. That is why any teacher should work with them, especially in the primary education stage. 1.2. Genres. As far as novels are concerned, we recommend practicing extensive reading individually, maybe even at home. Intensive reading, can only be recommended for certain passages. Next, we are going to consider poetry, which is adequate for intensive reading exercises carried out in the classroom. Now we are going to consider plays in the classroom. Therefore, we must keep in mind that plays always get their maximum expression when being performed. If we want to perform a play with our class, we should keep in mind that every student should be able to represent one character or have another activity, not less important, to carry out. 1.3. Periods and authors. It has to be kept in mind that we always refer to abridged editions or extracts prepared by the teacher beforehand. In the origins of English literature, we could only find one work which is worth being mentioned here, Beowulf's fight against the monster Grendel, which could be read in extracts. In the 14th and 15th century, we could choose Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales, or the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The next epoch we are going to consider is Renaissance. Works from this time could be read in higher grades, and therefore we can choose among the following. The Faerie Queene, 1580 to 1599 by Edmund Spenser. Polly Albion, 1613 plus 1622 by Michael Drayton. A Midsummer Night's Dream, 1596 by William Shakespeare. Friar Bacon and Friar Brandy, 1594 by Robert Greene. 17th century. John Milton, Ode on a Grecian Urn. Samuel Pepys, Diaries. The City Madam, by Philip Massinger. 18th century. Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe. Samuel Richardson, Clarissa. Lawrence Sterne, Tristram Shandy. Henry Fielding, Joseph Andrews. Richard Brinsley Sheridan, The School for Scandal. Anne Radcliffe, The Romance of the Forest. We do not recommend reading any of these works entirely, but selected parts in abridged editions, as for example volumes 3 and 4 of Tristram Shandy, with the description of his voyages to France. 19th century. William Wordsworth, Lyrical Ballads. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. Charles Dickens, David Copperfield. Charlotte Brontë, Jane Eyre. 20th century. The Long, Long Dances, 1970 by Eric Malpass. Hello, Mr. God, This is Anna by Finn. 21st century authors. E.g. Nick Hornby was born in Red Hill, Surrey, England, in 1957. He graduated from Cambridge University and taught English to foreign students while reviewing for magazines, including Time Out and The Literary Review. His first book, a series of critical essays on American novelists, was published in 1992. Fever Pitch, his memoir of a life devoted to Arsenal Football Club, was published in 1992. It won the William Hill Sports Book of the Year award and was adapted as both a play and a film, the latter starring Colin Firth. In 1999, Nick Hornby was awarded the E.M. Forster Award by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. 2. Typology of texts. 1. Criteria for choosing stories. Choosing a storybook that responds to the student's interests is a complex task. That is why the teacher must involve students in the choice of literary texts and pay attention to their likes, preferences, and needs, following the principles of the Universal Design for Learning, UDL. 2. Poetry. A poem is a composition usually written in verse. Poems rely heavily on senses, precise words choice, and metaphor. They may take the form of measures consisting of patterns of stresses, metric feet, or of patterns of different length syllables, as in classical prosody, and they may or may not utilize rhyme. 3. Drama. A play or drama offers another classical literary form that has continued to evolve over the years. It generally comprises mainly dialogue between characters and usually aims at dramatic theatrical performance rather than at reading. 4. Essay. An essay consists of a discussion of a topic from an author's personal point of view. 5. Prose fiction. Prose consists of writing that does not adhere to any particular formal structures. Narrative fiction generally favors prose for the writing of novels, short stories, and others. Singular examples of these exist throughout history, but they did not develop into systematic and discrete literary forms until recent centuries. 6. Literary genres in general. Autobiography, biography, children's literature. 7. Authentic and graded texts. Authentic texts are those texts that have not been written to learn a foreign language. Unlike adapted texts that are designed for language learning, authentic texts provide real language and help bring the real world into the classroom. 8. Practical applications. Activities before the story, pre-reading. Hollow right pointing triangle introducing new words through pictures, objects or mime. Hollow right pointing triangle relating the topic to their own experience. Activities during the story, while reading. Hollow right pointing triangle using puppets, masks or pictures. Hollow right pointing triangle miming or role play while presenting the story. Activities after the story, post-reading. Hollow right pointing triangle retelling the story. Hollow right pointing triangle reordering jumbled sentences of words.